Welcome, everyone. I'm Mariquita Solis, the live stream host of all-creatures.org. All-creatures.org was founded in 1998 and is a leading resource for faith-based animal rights veganism. Led by our executive director, Tams Nicholson, we provide free resources for people seeking to live compassionately towards all creatures. Our extensive library includes vegan sermons and commentaries, animal rights strategies, action alerts, events, and works by various vegan authors. We also sponsor websites for animal rights organizations. Our mission is to unite compassionate individuals worldwide who honor the dignity of all creatures. Today, we are very we're very honored to welcome Eva Hamer. Eva leads programs and policy for Pro-Animal Future and Pax Fauna, organizations dedicated to building a political movement to end animal farming through grassroots campaigns that transform public support for animals into law through citizen-initiated ballot measures and voter bloc organizing. Eva has been organizing in the grassroots animal freedom movement since 2015, when she began working with Direct Action Everywhere in Chicago. She lives and organizes in Portland, Oregon. So everyone that's watching, please let us know where you're watching from and put your questions in the comments. And welcome, Eva. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, well, we'd love to start off by hearing your vegan story. You're very young. So it's exciting when we see someone young who's taken, as much action as you have. So tell us, when did you learn about veganism, or how did it come to be?
Yeah, I think I've always been pretty uncomfortable with the idea of using animals for food. When I was even a kid, I can remember learning that meat was animals and being pretty skeptical that something that horrific could possibly be true. I had an older brother that was always messing with me, and I thought that this was actually just one of those things that he would say just to mess with me, that meat was animals, because that's crazy. Like, there's no way we're eating animals. So I slowly realized that was true, and sort of, I remember being a child and sort of expecting that somebody would explain it to me at some point, why it made sense. Maybe they just died naturally. Maybe, I don't know, what I thought would be explained to me. It never was. When I was throughout elementary school, I was aware of vegetarianism because my older sister was vegetarian for a short spell, and I would try on and off throughout elementary school to stop eating meat, but I was very young and had a hard time kind of remembering what I wanted to do. But I think I had an awareness even then that, like, eventually I would stop eating animals for good, when I was sort of a grown-up who was able to make my own decisions in a way. And when I was 13, going into 8th grade, I got the idea that it might be hard to try going vegan. I was aware of veganism through, I was into all these like AOL message boards at the time. I was into, and I think sometimes adults would just kind of, try to make conversation with the child, and they say, "Oh, you're vegetarian. Would you ever go vegan?" And I'd be like, No, that's way too hard. I would never go vegan. So I thought it might be interesting to try it for 30 days when I was in 8th grade, because I thought it would be this kind of exercise in discipline, like, wonder if I can. So I did all the research about why. So I kind of did it backwards, in a way, because I did all the research about why, how a person would go vegan, what the different animal products are that you avoid to do it, before I did it. And then, kids at school started asking, like, wait, no, but really why? Why are you, like, what's actually a reason for it? And I was like, oh yeah, great question. Let me get back to you on that. Because I didn't know, right? I didn't know about baby cows. I didn't know about male chicks. Like, like a lot of people thought, I was like, well, it doesn't hurt the cow to get milk from them. Like, why do people go vegan? And it was very easy to find the information when I looked for it, even at the time. And that really horrified me. I felt really disturbed by some of what I read about baby male chicks and baby cows, and I didn't ever want to go back. So I was the only vegan I knew for about 10 years, until I got involved in Direct Action Everywhere in Chicago about 10 years ago. And I think it was just so nourishing for me to finally have community that saw the world in the way that I did. I remember going to my first protest and looking around when the organizer gave a talk on nonviolence and talked about how, yes, it makes sense to be angry about what's happening to animals, and we're going to direct our anger towards systems and not individuals. And I remember looking around the room when we were doing this briefing before the protest, and there were about 20 people, and I was just amazed that, like, oh wow, all of these people are also angry about what's happening to animals. I had never experienced even one person before that day who shared that worldview, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, I bet that was very liberating when you found people that actually cared. I mean, because we can feel very isolated as vegans. And what would you tell someone who is a new vegan that is very depressed and doesn't know what to do, and people are laughing at them? And what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think it is really, really important to find community, and to organize with people who are like-minded. I think that a lot of times when vegans are doing outreach to people, we're kind of trying to just make new vegans wherever they are. And it's really, really hard for people to stay vegan or to really do any actions when they're isolated from a community. We're really, the strongest when we're together. And I think that there's nothing wrong with finding people who you could feel at home with. Sometimes people problematize it because when we're spending time with people who think the way that we do, then we're not making change. But, your personal life isn't necessarily where you need to be making change. I think from a strong base of support is kind of where we can kind of come from to do really effective advocacy.
Yeah, and do you have any profound moment that happened when you were out there working and speaking to people? I mean, a special vegan moment?
Well, the one coming to mind right now is so for a couple of years, I served as the legal coordinator for Direct Action Everywhere, which meant that I was taking care of their legal cases, and there were a bunch of criminal cases where people were charged with crimes for rescuing animals, for investigating factory farms, and for doing protests. And when I first learned this thing about the legal system, which is that the crime of conspiracy is just the crime of making an agreement with someone else to commit a crime. Conspiracy can be a felony even when the misdemeanor, even when the crime that you're conspiring to do is a misdemeanor. So there was a case where Wayne Chung, co-founder of DXE, was convicted of conspiracy to trespass, which is a felony, but trespass itself is a misdemeanor. And that boggled my mind. That how does that make sense? That a felony could, the agreement to do a misdemeanor is itself a felony. So agreement to do a petty crime is itself a serious crime. And at first this didn't make any sense to me. And then some big action of DXE's that I was a part of, I think it was the Farmer John's lockdown in LA before the slaughterhouse Farmer John's shut down in LA. There was just, the orchestration was so amazing. I was locked down. This is right before I left DXE to start Pax Fauna. I had a team, and we chained ourselves to the gate of the slaughterhouse to stop trucks from coming in. And that was kind of all I knew about the plan that we chained ourselves and blocked the gate. I suspected there might be something else going on, but I didn't know. And then during this experience, while I'm sitting on the ground in chains, I hear that there are also people inside the slaughterhouse who are locked down. There are also people on the roof who are dropping a banner. And the orchestration of the whole thing and the organization of the whole thing, it was so amazing that I kind of had this realization of why conspiracy is this greater crime in the justice system. It's just that how much stronger we are when we work together. And that's not, just for civil disobedience or just to break the law. It's all over society. Like, whenever a human works by ourselves, what we can do is so, so tiny. versus what we can do when we work together. And I just really believe that we're so much more valuable when we're organized, when we're together.
I bet that's amazing to see everyone coming together, like you said, and all the details, and then it all to play out. I mean, I know that just going with PETA to do a circus protest, but then, I mean, everyone knew their role, right? We all got together and we talked about it, and this is where you're going to be. They're going to come in and they're going to say you're going to jail. Don't worry about that. You're not going to jail, right? Just do this and don't get in the way of don't block the sidewalk, right? So it was all very orchestrated, and everyone knew the law and their place. And so that was what was so amazing to me, that we weren't. It wasn't just like let's go there and see what happens. No, it was very well thought out, and that was very impressive to me. And then we did our parts. 2 people got taken to jail, and the rest of us, well, then of course they went to support the people. That was already in play, right? That they knew they were going to be taken to jail. So all that was being played out just exactly like it was going to be. The rest of us went and had a nice lunch, and it was great to have that time afterwards with vegans, that people that cared and people that were willing to stand there with signs and to be made fun of and everything, and speak up for animals. So I mean, how amazing it is when we come together, and it's so true what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, fast forward to the present, we're, last year we qualified, or this last election, we qualified a couple of measures for the ballot in Denver, which was just an amazing amount of work that so many different people contributed their time to get signatures on this binding petition to get this law qualified for the ballot so that the voters can vote on it. And now all of a sudden together we're able to reach hundreds of thousands of people through this electoral process that, as individuals, like we definitely wouldn't be able to each reach like that, a fraction of that group. And so that kind of, synergy of when people are all working together really achieve much greater things.
Yeah, it's very true. So what did you study then?
In college, I studied music therapy. I worked in hospice as a music therapist for a few years, 4.5 years, I think. And that was a very meaningful experience. And that was when I got involved in activism for the first time. So in the daytime, I was driving around to people in their homes and nursing homes, using music to relieve symptoms at the end of life. And then afterwards, on weekends, etc., I was organizing a protest group in Chicago. It was definitely a very meaningful time, but also not, the most related to what I'm doing now, which I think is pretty common for people in the movement, that we find ourselves in positions because we care and because we are able to figure things out. There isn't necessarily like a good training for doing all of this. It's just kind of have to figure it out as we go along and get advice from a lot of people who have done similar work before us.
Yeah, and that's very important to know, because some people might think, well, I don't have the background for that. Well, so I have a degree in photo design, which is really not applicable in what I do now. Except for that, that rich background, right? All of that supports what I do. But yes, that concentration in photo design is not what I'm doing every day for in the vegan area. So, but yeah, nothing. Don't let anything stop you. Basically, is what we're saying here, is that you can have a background in something different other than activism, and you can still make huge contributions like you have done with Pro Animal Future and Pax Fauna. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said at the beginning, these are political organizations. We're trying to use different political processes, voter bloc organizing, lobbying, and ballot initiatives to take this strong public support that we see, where a lot of people they'll say in surveys that they really support pro-animal positions pretty strongly, but then of course you see that that's not quite, our legal system hasn't quite caught up to that level of support that people have. And so our mission is really to take that public support and turn it into law through these different processes. So we do that in a few different ways. One is through ballot initiatives. People may have heard of our Denver ballot initiatives this past year, where we ran a initiative to ban fur sales and one to ban slaughterhouses, and qualified both of those for the ballot, which is 30,000 signatures overall, which is a big accomplishment. Neither passed this past time, but we really, really learned a lot and are feeling very confident in this next round of initiatives. We're starting to run a ban on foie gras in Denver and also in DC, while doing some city council lobbying in Portland, Oregon. So for viewers that aren't familiar with ballot initiative processes, it's something that's like almost uniquely American in about half of the US states and a bunch of localities. Any citizen can just like write a law and then get that law on a petition. And it's not one of these like change.org petitions where people are just like, I support this thing, and then someone with the decision-making power gets to feel the pressure of that. It's not that. It's a legally binding petition. So it's something where we get signatures only from registered voters and then turn in these petitions to the elections office. If they find that we've gotten enough, then the law just goes on the ballot automatically. And that's a really powerful tool, we think. It's how Prop 12 got passed, which banned confinement in California. It's how Question 3 in Massachusetts got passed, also confinement ban. It's how we've gotten gay marriage in a lot of states originally, and how cannabis legalization has been popping up, is all through this ballot initiative process. And ballot initiatives are usually something that the voters can be quite a bit more progressive on than the people that they elect. I think people who are holding power, legislators, they can feel like they have a bit more to lose if they support something that's kind of on the edge of what public opinion is supporting, because there are all these other people that they have to kind of please, donors, etc., where voters are able to just kind of vote their conscience and vote for the progressive policy. So we think that ballot initiatives have, and I think it's been shown, the ballot initiatives have really a lot of potential. And we are not neglecting the more traditional political processes, which is voter bloc organizing and lobbying. What that means is intervening in elections, making sure that when an election is happening in an area that we're working, we are part of it and we are endorsing, we're telling our people who to vote for, we're making sure people know who the pro-animal candidates are, and having relationships with those candidates while they're still candidates, helping them out in getting elected. And then that way, when they do get elected, we're already friends, we already have rapport, we already have some understanding about what the pro-animal policies are that we would like to work on, and they also would like to work on. And then lobbying is, when people are then in power, we're working with them to get laws passed. So very new organization, very new model, including the voter bloc organizing and lobbying, but we're definitely seeing a lot of potential in those.
Well, that's exciting. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get involved with legislation, and some of that can be very overwhelming for someone who knows nothing. I mean, what's the starting point of learning about how you can make an impact in the political system?
Yeah, well, a lot of organizations like mine do try to make it as easy as possible for people to get involved in, because it is very complicated. Just anything as an individual is nearly impossible. But there are, I know that Humane League is one organization. Humane Society of the United States is now called Humane World for Animals, is another one. They have like action alerts where if you sign up, you'll get just like, you give them your address so they know who all of your different lawmakers are, which you might not even know, but that's okay. And this is all US based. And then you'll get action alerts where you can email your representative, you can call your representative and let them know your position on something, which, if it's an organization you trust, one of these pro-animal organizations, then you don't actually need to do your own research on the issues. You can receive that from an organization you trust. And I think, that's another thing that can be kind of problematized. It's like, well, we want to think for ourselves, right? We want to do the research ourselves. And I think after leading an endorsement process myself, I realized kind of how much time it takes to be thorough and figure out what the policies are and figure out who the people are that we want to support. And I think that there is absolutely nothing wrong with someone who's busy, someone who's has other things to focus on, from kind of outsourcing some of those decisions and saying, okay, well, there's this other person or this other organization that has values that align with mine. And if they say to vote for someone, or they say to support a particular policy by calling my legislature, I believe them. And I don't need to spend another 3 hours like digging through the entire policy or looking into this person's background. I can just say like, yes, I'm willing to be part of this voting bloc, part of this group of people who yield our political power in an organized way to make what we want happen.
Well, what kind of conversations have you had with our legislators or elected officials? I mean, well, yeah. What do they say?
Yeah, well, it's pretty new to us, and there's a lot that I haven't done yet, or we haven't done. And the conversations so far are very encouraging. So what we did this past year was, in Portland, was endorse a bunch of people for the Portland City Council race. This was a really exciting race because it was kind of a once in a lifetime election, because in Portland, Oregon, we got a whole new form of government. We elected 12 people to city council, where previously there had only been 5. I think there was like 1 incumbent in the whole race, 100 people running. And so it felt like this kind of clean slate and a great opportunity to meet people who would then be city councilors before they were elected. And so what I did was I tried to figure out kind of who had a good shot of getting elected. And in some cases I was right. In some cases I absolutely wasn't. But I sent them, a bunch of them, a questionnaire saying like, well, which of these pro-animal policies would you support? We're trying to do an endorsement process. And I got together with a bunch of different animal rights groups in the area. Animal Rights Collective Portland, ARC PDX, Veggies Do It Better, Compassionate PDX, and Pro-Animal Oregon. And we all got together to do this endorsement process. And so I put out this survey that asked about a few different policies, like how would you feel about a ban on foie gras, a ban on fur, a green food policy that makes the city buy less meat, get the city to stop using rodenticide, ban cat declawing, make sure there's space for animals in homeless shelters and domestic violence shelters and disaster shelters. And in this survey, there was also like quite a bit of elaboration. So this itself was sort of education for the candidates too. It wasn't just, what do you think? It was like, here's what you should think. Does that sound good? And I think for a lot of people who we ended up endorsing, this might have been kind of the first time they had really encountered these issues, and definitely the first time they'd encountered these issues in a political context. Because a lot of times the way that the movement deals with the public is in a consumer context. We're talking to people as shoppers and as people who are patrons of restaurants and people who are home chefs. And we're trying to change what they're doing in this very, very private context where they really value autonomy and they really value personal choice and they really value, obviously, nutrition, health. And we might come back and be like, well, actually this is way more healthy, but they don't know that, and they don't believe you, random person on the street, about what's healthier. And it's this situation where we can find people in a really hostile position to us because they're in this part of their life where they value all the things that feel threatened by our requests of them. Where when we're approaching people in this political context and we're talking about animals themselves, not about, you got to figure out some different recipes to cook for dinner. We're saying, hey, there's this policy that could help a lot of animals and you have the power to support it. We find that people in general are a whole lot more friendly. And so with these candidates in Portland, Portland, Oregon is, of course, a very progressive place, probably the most progressive place in the country. There's still, interestingly, kind of a right-left divide. It just sort of happens further to the left than it does in other places. We were approaching mostly progressive candidates and using progressive values to engage them. And in general, they were very, sometimes they have more questions. I was surprised that even like a vegan candidate didn't know what foie gras was. Foie gras, of course, is the enlarged diseased liver of a duck or goose who's been force-fed, served as a delicacy in French cuisine mostly. And it was a lot of opportunity for education. And in the context, it was like, well, they wanted our endorsement. And so they were in this situation where it made a lot of sense for them to be like, yeah, yes, of course, nobody should ever be force-fed for liver. That's crazy. Like, yes, of course we should ban fur. Fur is still legal, really? Like, really, really encouraging conversations. And then they took office a few months ago, and we've been in conversations about getting some of those conversations turned into law.
That's amazing, and it's very inspiring and hopeful, because it's incredible that there's so many abuses against animals that are legal, like cockfighting is still legal, and that it's not taken seriously. And I don't know how that can be. Have you talked to people that don't really care, elected officials? Or
Well, the interesting thing is that at least the candidate stage, the ones who didn't care mostly didn't reply to my emails, I think. I'm sure that there were people who very much do care, but they were just so busy with the process of getting elected that they weren't able to make time for this particular endorsement. But no, in general, the people who I talked to were very engaged. I mean, I think that, there is something with lawmakers that when they don't care, they still don't want to alienate people. And so maybe there was, one person that we didn't end up endorsing who just sort of, listened, asked a lot of questions, didn't actually say anything supportive. And so I got from that maybe the care wasn't there, and maybe there was some alliance to business interests who were supporting that person's campaign that weren't able to be gotten to. But the thing about politics is that it actually doesn't matter if people care. Politicians are sort of, could you imagine having a job and needing to reapply for that job 2 years after you get it, and the application process itself takes 9 months? Like, these are people who want to keep their jobs, and it doesn't actually, like, yes, they get into this for moral reasons, and they're able to do things that actualize their moral goals. And I'm not interested in how purely they care about animals. I understand that these are people who want to keep their jobs, and I want to make the animal rights movement something that is absolutely a necessity in order for people to keep their jobs if they're in office. I think that there's a lot of work to be done for the animal rights movement to organize and act as a voter bloc and to pressure elected officials. But I do think it's absolutely possible with the numbers that we already have.
And what are all the ways to pressure elected officials?
Oh, tons. There's the, we say carrot and stick. So there's the carrot. There's the helping them out when they are getting elected. We can fundraise for them. We can donate ourselves. We can knock doors for them. Knocking doors is so hard for elected officials because they have this long campaign cycle and they're trying to get people to care about it. But there's all these other things, especially thinking about local politics, like how much everybody's mind was on the national sphere. And then like you're trying to get people to come out for getting one Portlander in office over another. Like it can be really hard. And so, animal rights activists, we care all year long. Like we were able to get people, 50 people out to an event to fundraise for candidates in June, which is kind of too far from the election for most people to care. Yeah, so we can knock doors for them. We can fundraise. We can do social media outreach for them. We can, actually just listen to them and see what they need from us and help out in that way. So these are ways to kind of build a relationship and kind of let people know that the animal rights movement is kind of a big part of what got you elected. And then once they're in office, there are a lot of different ways to pressure. There's a hope that you've made good enough friends with them at the start that they're going to follow through. But, still busy people have a lot of different priorities to juggle. Ways that we can pressure in kind of ascending order. So we can organize people to send emails. We can organize people to make phone calls. We can organize people to make public comment. Public comment itself can take up a lot of a meeting. And so it can, in addition to what you're actually saying at a public comment, it can be actually pretty disruptive because this is there's this committee that only has this many meetings and now you've taken up a whole month of meetings just by having like 20 people come talk. It's, yeah. And then you can say, well, we can do this again next month, or you can work with us. And then, you know, we're not beyond doing something like a protest or demonstrations, something to make it kind of very visible what the public wants. We can also do non-binding petitions. So I talked earlier about like ballot initiative petitions being this really direct way to get laws made, but it's a bit easier to get signatures on a non-binding petition, which is just kind of a list of people either online, which you can't do. Most places you can't do ballot initiatives online or in person on paper. Having people sign this petition saying like, I'm urging city council to pass a foie gras ban, and sort of constantly delivering these signatures to the council. These can be all different ways to elect their electeds.
Wow, well, it's hard to wrap my head around all of it, but it's amazing. So when you're protesting, do people ever like? So when we were protesting and demonstrating, I don't know, at downtown Atlanta, and we were asking to speak to people. No one ever came out. Have you had people come out and you speak to them directly where that was a success?
So a protest is a pretty inconvenient time to talk to somebody. It's a way to bring the pressure on. It's a way to, honestly, to make them uncomfortable. Pro Animal Future doesn't do protests ourselves, but I think, you know, wouldn't be beyond it, at least like a, you know, demonstration in a particular case when it's really escalated to needing that. And like, my expectation from a protest wouldn't be that a lawmaker would come out and talk to us right then, necessarily. I mean, sure, that's a great ask. And like, wow, what a terrifying context that is for any person to come meet like a crowd of people who are kind of angry at them. Like nobody wants that. But it might be that like, okay, the next time somebody reaches out to them, they're more likely to respond. Or maybe even the next time that, you know, if there was some kind of good cop, bad cop situation going on, somebody who maybe wasn't, oh, I didn't organize the protest, that's a totally different group. I'm so sorry that happened to you, but gosh, if we could get this you know, fur ban passed, then I think I could probably get them to go away. That you might be just like make the other conversations a little bit more productive in a climate where there's pressure being put on in all these different ways is kind of the model.
Yes, and I think, well, it's very interesting. I mean, the pressure, and they don't want people out there demonstrating. I'm just being out there and watching people walk by and look at us like what's going on, right? And it does put a lot of pressure on the organization. So, I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. And so, what other ways have you done? I guess stepping up in activism.
I mean, yeah, all sorts of ways. All sorts of ways in history. What we're focused on right now is the ballot initiative process. And you know, you might think, as we thought originally, honestly, that the ballot initiative process can kind of like fully sidestep this need to pressure policymakers. But I think we've learned that not really. They still, you know, their endorsement of a policy that voters are voting on directly definitely still matters. And so having good relationships with them is still important. So that's, I think, a reason why protest is really, really a last resort, because you want to have good relationships with people who are making decisions that are affecting, you know, the policy goals. So this, and so this means, you know, focusing on helping them out, having a lot of conversations about trying to frame these issues in ways that are resonant with their goals, with the policy goals they already have, and the values that they are already holding and proclaiming. I think these are all, yeah, things that are going to be really helpful.
Well, what does Pax Fauna mean?
Pax Fauna is Peace for Animals. It's the original organization that we started in 2021. Pax Fauna is a research organization, and we did a bunch of research on organizing, on strategy, and on narrative. And so our first piece of work was a narrative report where we did a bunch of interviews and focus groups for just ordinary Americans, because like I mentioned earlier, we were aware of these studies that show that like 30% of Americans will agree with like saying that slaughterhouses should be closed. It goes down only slightly when you remind them in that survey that is where meat comes from. But still, we're talking like 27% of Americans are saying like, yes, I would support a ban on slaughterhouses. And then in that same survey, you ask those same people, how much do you agree with the statement, eating meat is a personal choice and no one can tell me what to do? Then you get 98% of people supporting that, or like agreeing with that. And so this mismatch where like, okay, we have this like pretty big chunk of people, like not a majority, but a pretty big chunk of people who are supporting this like quite ambitious animal rights goal. And an almost like everyone, besides, that 2% of vegetarians and vegans, I guess, that are saying, don't take away my meat. And so we just had this question about like, what is the difference? What's going on there when people are saying these two things that kind of conflict with each other? And so we went about this study by saying, we did this whole kind of analysis of how's the movement talking about the issues, what kind of frames and messages are we already using, looking at all these different press releases from all these different organizations. What is what's the opposition saying? Like, how is the opposition? How are the farmers and the like industry organizations? How are they defending themselves? Like, what kind of pro meat messaging is out there? And then we looked at the press. Like, how's the press talking about this? How is the press understanding this and kind of framing it to the public? And with all these kind of different messages in mind, we scheduled all of these individual interviews one-on-one with just all these people across the political spectrum, across the country, just anybody who is like a likely voter who is in the US. We talked to a bunch of people, and it was amazing what would happen in these like one-on-one conversations where we would just ask open-ended questions. We weren't doing any messaging at all. We weren't trying to convince them. We were just saying, what comes to mind when you think about animals used for food? Tell me more. And they would talk about, like, they would just kind of come in with this defensiveness, like kind of trying to convince you that they're not a bad person for eating animals, which is like, you didn't even know this is an animal rights organization. Like, we came up with this, like, with this kind of sterile sounding name to be our research organization. So they didn't know it was animals because we didn't want to bias them. And then kind of just given quiet listening, given just open-ended questions, they're able to kind of move through defensiveness and like process all these different objections and be like, well, it's natural. And then, from the same person, they'd be like, you really have to eat what's natural. You have to eat a natural diet. Kind of sad that animals have to die, but like, you got to do what's natural. And then they would be able to move on from that themselves. And they'd say, well, I mean, yeah, I guess not everything that's natural is like good. I think there are probably plenty of things that are natural that we shouldn't do. Like we didn't need to do any of the kind of classic vegan back and forth. Just given time and openness, they were able to move really far. But then there was this one objection that they couldn't get past themselves, and that was futility. So once we heard something like, I mean, yeah, okay, whatever, I guess I could go vegan. I guess I could just stop eating animal products. But like, even if I do, then there are billions of other people who won't, and it totally won't make a difference. And that was something that they couldn't talk themselves through. Like, I think, the vegan outreacher would have something to say. They'd say, well, I mean, you got to do your part. Like, everybody has to do their part. If everybody did it, then it would be a thing. And the way you can do it, and then ask other people to do it. But that was not something that anybody ever generated for themselves. And then we started testing messages, and we asked this question in these interviews, imagining a scenario where restaurants, consumers, food producers, grocery stores all work together with the government to phase meat out gradually. Would you be supportive of a total transition away from using animals for food? And we were getting yeses. Like, we were getting so many yeses from these just ordinary, like somebody in Georgia, like somebody in North Carolina, like just whoever would, spend this time with us. And then at the end, we'd ask that question, and they would like be with us and be like, yes, of course. Like, and we would get these quotes like, Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be good to get dragged along. Like, say there was like a big tax on meat, and now a burger's $20, and I guess no more, or I guess $20 isn't actually that much. Now a burger is $100. Like, I guess no more hamburgers. And it was really amazing how much when they were talking, imagining themselves as part of a whole, they could be like, yes, society should move away. I don't want to go vegan and like alienate myself from all my friends and family and not know what to eat and be hungry all the time and not get to have my favorite, meals at Thanksgiving or whatever. But if we all went that way, like, yeah, of course we should. And so what that led us to is this thing of thinking that like this idea of the civic frame versus the consumer frame. That like when we're talking to people in terms of what they eat, we're talking to them as consumers and they're very hostile to us. But when we're talking to people as civic actors, as somebody who gets to have some say in where society is headed, they're a whole lot more friendly towards us. And so the thing that Pax Fauna did then was to kind of front load and incubate pro-animal future, which is the political wing. So we have this kind of this research wing of our work and a political wing that is kind of trying to take the Pax Fauna learning and really put it into action.
That's amazing. Now, and make sure y'all, everybody that's watching, please put your questions or comments in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. This is fascinating. So how has your role changed throughout the years?
Oh my gosh, constantly. Really, really so much. I think that what it is, I've recently been saying that what it is to be in leadership is to kind of always be doing something you're bad at, because as soon as you figure out what to do, then it's either done or you give it to somebody else. So yeah, at first at Pax Fauna, we were all doing the same thing. We were all doing the research. So we would have these interviews and we would code the interviews and we would write we wrote the reports. And then when it became pro-animal future, then we kind of started to have different roles. And I have taken a bunch of different things over the years. Right now, or more recently, I led the endorsement process of Portland city councilors. And now I'm sort of helping the campaign directors in our 3 different cities guide their work and figure out, what their next steps are and what all needs to be done, and try to make sure that we have all the learnings from those things. And it's it's a lot of figuring things out, and kind of figuring out how to be a lobbyist and how to be a manager and how to figure how to kind of measure our impact and figure out if we're on the right track, and also a lot of like networking with other people and trying to make sure that we're not just like leaving information on the table, and that we're kind of getting all the information that's out there already that's relevant to what we're doing.
Well, you have a lot of courage, and you sound like you have a very strong voice. I mean, a very strong speaking voice. You do. And so, were you always like this as a child?
No, not at all. I think I was a very shy child. I was a very shy child, and I think that animal rights organizing kind of brought out, it presented me with like a need to be the organizer. I think that I wasn't very extroverted at all. But then when I started to organize in Chicago, there was this need for somebody to be the welcomer, and somebody to be the inviter, and somebody to, in fact, we all needed to be, all organizers, I think, really need to have this role where you are getting to know people and you're initiating conversations and you're bringing people in. And I think that that's something that, I worry when people are really identifying strongly as introvert or as antisocial or anything like this, because it's very much, it's a skill set, I think, that can be developed. And it's also a sensitivity that can be managed. That like when, I think in the pandemic, we probably all got kind of introverted in a way. Like we all sort of, when we first started coming back to socializing, we're like, oh, wow. Like I think a lot of people who maybe identified as extroverts before were like, oh gosh, I'm really exhausted after all the socializing because I'm just not used to it. And I think that we really can get used to it, even if at this point in time, even if we find it overwhelming, we can get used to doing a lot of talking and doing a lot of relating to other people. And it's, it's like a lot of things. It's like exercise. Like the more you do it, the more you can do. And the more that's just comfortable doing, if you're sedentary all the time, like just carrying your groceries upstairs might be like really, really winding. But if you're working out every day, you might not even notice that that is exercise when you're doing that little bit of work. Yeah, and so I think that, you know, for people who want to organize for animal rights, I think that interpersonal skills and public speaking skills are things that we really need to work on and invest in, because communicating to other people is really the thing, right, that we're trying to do. We're trying to get our message into other people's heads, and how do we do that? We have to figure it out.
Right. And I was very shy too. So, I mean, it is a skill, right? And so we have Lalise is saying she or he is in Connecticut. They're in Connecticut, and I'm a flaming introvert, laughing out loud. So yes, and then that's all good too, because introverts can do behind the scenes stuff, and wherever you feel comfortable. We need everyone here. I'm a she. Okay, you can do that. Do what you need to do there. Tell us what you do in your activism. But so what about communication? What would you say are the important skills of a good communicator now? Because you are having to be very delicate when you're speaking, and you don't want to turn someone off. So what would you recommend to other people that are just learning how to speak about veganism?
I think that the interesting, and maybe the principle I would like bring over everything is just wanting to just get yourself in somebody else's head and speak to what's important to them and not what's important to you. And the way that we can find that out is by asking a lot of questions and actually listening to the answers. And so I'm not talking about just like Socratic, reasoning, but I'm talking about like really taking the time to understand who somebody is. And so if I'm meeting with a politician, I'm like reading about them, I'm hearing what they've had to say first, and I'm asking them. So one of the questions in my questionnaire was like, tell me an experience that affected the way that you think about animals. And so then I'd hear about when the family dog died, or when I had this magical experience out in nature, interacting with deer, or just a lot of really beautiful experiences. Or people would tell me about, I watched Food Inc., or I watched some documentary, and that really made me think about the food system in a different way. And that's really important. And then I think another thing when I think about communication is talking about how we're so much more powerful when we're together. There is some work in maintaining togetherness, because conflicts happen between people. That's something that happens in society, is we have conflicts. And taking the time to listen first, even to our friends, I think is really, really important. Because it's, we say, and I studied nonviolent communication a lot, and one thing that gets thrown around there is this phrase that it's really hard to listen if you haven't been heard. And that goes for our interpersonal conflicts, and that goes for our advocacy conversations, that it's, really important to kind of listen to how things are actually landing. Something very humbling about the Pax Fauna research was that we had these messages that we really thought were going to land very well, and only by presenting them and listening, what is the response to that, were we able to say that some things, they really don't land. For example, the comparison to cats and dogs, just really, we tried it with a bunch of different participants, and it just didn't land. I think, conservatives would often reject the premise, say that these other animals are kind of bred for killing, and so that makes it okay, that it's just what, it's what they're meant for, and sort of seeing some harmony in that somehow. And then liberals would go the other way, and they would say, yeah, it's cool for them. People in China want to eat dogs. I have no problem with that. Everybody teach their own. In my culture, it's very okay to eat pigs. And I was surprised. I thought the dogs and cats were the way, that okay, you have this emotional connection with an animal, but we take that emotional connection and move it to this other. Oh no, that's not going to work. So I think it's really important to listen and to be okay, updating our beliefs and updating our strategies based on the evidence in front of us.
Yeah, well, what does work? If that doesn't work, which I thought did work, I'm not going to be making any more memes like that or anything, but what does work?
The messages, I talked about the trying to do the civic frame rather than the consumer frame. And one particular message that's really interesting in there is the meat-eating messenger. So for somebody to say, I love a good steak, I love a good burger, and this animal rights policy is the right thing to do for our future, what that does is it just cuts through defensiveness. That when we're messaging as vegans and we're talking about how we're vegan and we've been vegan for this long time, it's actually not that hard. We're kind of saying I'm better than you, and you should be able to be as good as me. When somebody says, yeah, I eat meat. I eat meat and I love a good steak. And come on, let's do this. Let's do this support for this pro-animal policy. The person listening doesn't hear, they're not being attacked. They're not a bad person. They're just being kind of messaged to on this values level, and they're just able to hear the message in this way. Now, of course, the meeting messenger will challenge quite a bit of what animal rights activists are often doing when we're talking about veganism. And I think that, when we talk about switching from a consumer lens to a lens of talking about civic action, it can feel very abstract. And so I think that the meat eating messenger kind of brings it into focus. I'm not saying that you need to eat meat. I don't eat meat and I will never. But figuring out ways that we can actually talk to people in the civic way, where we're not bringing in consumerism, we're not bringing in what they eat or what they buy, who they buy. We're bringing in what we want on this societal change level that they can be a small part of. The people are a lot more friendly to us in that way. And this is totally speculative. We don't have evidence of this in this case, but there is some sense that people can have a consistency bias. And once they do one thing that's pro-animal, they can be more likely to do other things because they want to act in accordance with who they have demonstrated themselves to be.
Well, this is definitely a different way of, a more expansive way of thinking is what you're talking about.
Yeah, expansive and just a little less rigid, I think. Having an idea about how change happens and just being willing to change.
Yes, and we have to be flexible because what we're doing isn't always working. So, yeah. All right. Well, we have a comment from Gino, who's saying he is a former introvert and now extrovert thanks to animal rights work. That's wonderful.
I know Gino. Hi.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have
Great.
that.
Thanks for watching, y'all. And everyone, make sure y'all subscribe. Well, Eva, I want to make sure that everybody knows how they can find your organizations and be a part. Now, what if somebody's watching and wants to volunteer?
Absolutely. So we have a lot of volunteer opportunities in Denver, in DC, and in Portland. You can sign up on proanimal.org to get involved in any of those. We also have an event coming up, and we'll have more events of this type that we're calling Slaughter Free September, where throughout the entire month of September, we're inviting people to come to Denver. And if you don't live there, if you work remotely, you can do your work during the day and come hang out with us in the evening. We'll put people up in Airbnbs, and we'll get a lot of signatures to get this initiative on the ballot. And so it's a way that people can help out. It's super fun to come be a part of a community and get together with all these people who really care in this very intense way. And you can go to proanimal.org/SFS for Slaughter Free September. There's an interest form on there you can fill out to let us know that you're interested in coming, and that'll help us figure out kind of what, how much housing we need, etc. And that's the entire month of September. If there's any point in the month that people want to come, if you want to come for the whole month, that's cool. If you want to take a long weekend and come for a Thursday to Tuesday or something, that's cool. And yeah, those are some of the ways to get involved.
Well, that's wonderful. All right, so let me show you some more comments. We've got Gino saying, hi, I love you too. And then we have another comment here, dominionmovement.org. It's probably wise to consider the shame that can come with finding out something very new that seems like we should have known sooner.
Yeah. Interesting thing about that is that people were so articulate about how they do know. They're just trying not to think about it. At that first question, what comes to mind when you think about animals used for food? I try not to think about it. It would kind of put me off my food if I did. And so it's yes, I think when we finally look at that thing that we've been avoiding, of course, I think we've all probably felt some amount of shame about it. And it's because I think of that shame that's kind of underlying that dissonance that makes it so easy to trigger defensiveness. It makes it so easy. Like even, you've had the experience of just telling somebody you're vegan and then they're like, well, stop attacking me. And that was definitely like confirmed in our research that just the question, what comes to mind when you think about animals used for food, like brought up some defensiveness already. And I think that's really because of the shame that this person's pointing to.
That's very interesting. All right, well, let's have one more comment here. Giving resources for people to watch on their own may be a good way to mitigate that and allow people who react that way to process fully the reality.
If they watch, I mean, the interesting thing is that most of the people we talked to were already aware. Like it wasn't a matter of not having information. Like they had come across some slaughterhouse videos. They had this like image of factory farming is bad, that like meat is pretty, I better not think about it because it'll upset me if I do. And it was more just kind of the space to process that they needed to come to terms with it, and like an actually actionable thing to do that wasn't gonna be too costly. So, set them apart from friends and family, make it impossible for them to like have a social life and know what to eat, etc.
That's very interesting. Y'all, I want to remind you to visit us at www.all-creatures.org and help support this program by making a one-time donation or a recurring donation of any amount, and subscribe and like us, please. So, Eva, I think it's very interesting that people already know, and so it's kind of like just allowing them somehow being the support to bring it together, like you're saying. They most have seen, most people, it sounds like, do know about slaughterhouses, and they have their opinions and they don't want to know more, which is a very human thing. So being like you're holding a safe space for these conversations to happen.
Right, yeah, and having, trying to really engage people in a civic way, that letting them take that support for animals that they already have and do something with it that is going to feel meaningful and going to feel worth the effort, because people don't feel like it's worth the effort to go vegan when they're the only one doing it. Where voting yes on a ballot measure, getting a signature, sending something, writing to their city council person, writing to their legislator, these feel like, okay, I'm part of something. I'm going to put my small bit in the ring, and everybody else is also doing that. And together, we're going to achieve something really great.
Well, we all make a difference, and when we all come together, like you're saying, we're very powerful. So I'm so grateful. This has been very insightful. I have a lot to think about this afternoon. So thank you so much, Eva, and thank you all for watching and your really wonderful comments, and for stepping up and stepping out for animals. And we'll have to have you back on again later, and you can give us some more updates in a year, maybe. We'll see.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
All right. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.